Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a few moments.
Okay, well, thank you everyone again for showing up today and joining us for the webinar presentation we are running today called What You Need to Know About Dyslexia Screening Laws. We're excited to have a full panel today collaborating between Amplify Education, the National Center on Improving Literacy, Woodland Elementary School, and the University of Oregon.
Hello.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Stephen, should I go ahead and get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay, great. Awesome. All right, so hey everyone, this is Julia Gonzales, and I just want to back up what Stephen just said. We're very excited that you all are joining us today for the first installment of our webinar series created in honor of Dyslexia Awareness Month. My fellow panelists and I are very excited to kick off this important discussion with you. However, before we get started, my colleague Stephen would like to cover some basic housekeeping items.
Yes. Yes. Thanks everyone again for joining us today. Today's presentation will be about 45 minutes in length. And for attendees, there is both a question and chat section in your panel. Throughout this presentation, we really do encourage you to ask any questions or provide feedback about the webinar itself. So if you hear anything, if you have bad audio, please let us know and we'll get to them throughout the presentation. At the end of the presentation, the presenters will get to as many questions as they can. Everyone will receive a recording of the webinar afterwards, and should you wish to share it with a colleague or watch it again. I will now turn it back to Julia and the rest of our panelists who will take it from here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So most of you on this line may be very familiar with Amplify, but for those who are not, I thought I would just share a little bit about our history. We are a pioneer in the K-8 education space. We were founded by two Rhodes Scholars in 2000, and we're very well known for providing assessment support, including the DIBELS assessment. We also provide other tools for to support instruction and intervention in the same grades. We are committed to working with educators to driving student outcomes. And through our work on the assessment side, we support about 3 million students in all 50 states. I should note that we also have curriculum products in ELA and science. So we have brought together a group of experts to discuss how to apply policy, research, and technology to drive student outcomes in practice. Panelists, could you please introduce yourselves and share with us a little background about your work? We can start with Hank, if that works for you, Hank.
Sure. Hello, my name is Hank Feen, and I work at the University of Oregon. I'm an associate professor in the school psychology program, and I direct the Center on Teaching and Learning, and also I direct the National Center on Improving Literacy, which is charged with scaling up evidence-based approaches for screening, identification, and treatment of students with dyslexia.
Thanks. Gina?
Hi, I'm Gina Biancarosa. I'm also an associate professor at the University of Oregon, and my research focuses predominantly on reading comprehension, but I also direct the research and development of DIBELS measures here at the university.
Excellent, thank you. Danielle?
Hi, I'm Danielle D'Amico. I'm a learning scientist at Amplify. What that means is I work on the research and development of our products and making sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing and are effectively meeting the needs of our teachers and students. I'm a school psychologist by training.
Great, thank you. Stacy, would you like to introduce yourself? We might be having a delay with Stacy, so I'll go ahead and get started.
Okay, I'm here. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry about that. No, here I am. Hey, I'm Stacy Vandeven, and I'm a Title I reading specialist out of Southeast Missouri. I've been in education for about 16 years. I've been a reading specialist for 13, and what's neat about this is I have used Amplify assessments for the entire 13 years that I've been in this reading specialist, including the DIBELS. And I've also been part of their recent case study that is involving these new measures that are helping us identify these dyslexia difficulties with students. So that's kind of where I came in. I've kind of been there for a while. So
that's great. Well, we're really lucky to have Stacy and our experts joining us. My name is Julia Gonzales. I serve as the Executive Director for Government Relations for Amplify. I've been with the company for about 6 years, and I am the policy nerd. So I track policy and legislative requirements for our company just to make sure that we're helping meet the needs and requirements of our clients, such as yourselves, out in the States. So let's get to the next item of business. The goal of today's discussion will focus on the following. We'll go over latest state policy trends, and next policy and practice. We'll also have a discussion regarding research findings, why mCLASS assessment, so we'll address that question. We'll also explore common classroom challenges and solutions that we've heard from the field. We will also have a chance to hear from Stacy, a Missouri case study, and then we'll wrap up with resources. So, dyslexia, we've all heard the statistics. An estimated 5 to 15% of the population has dyslexia. That's a conservative estimate. We may know someone even close to us that's diagnosed with it, but what is dyslexia and how can we help children at risk for dyslexia? So what you see here is a chart put together by understood.org, which I think does a really fine job of answering some of the basic questions. And as you can see illustrated in this diagram, dyslexia is a brain-based issue that makes it difficult to learn and read accurately and fluently. It is a lifelong condition. Kids do not outgrow dyslexia, but the good news is with the right support, key skills can improve. Latest state policy trends. So on the policy front, there's a lot to unpack here. So let's dig into background and a few key policy highlights. In terms of the state policy, thanks to a passionate grassroots movement spearheaded by an impressive group of parents and other advocates through groups like Decoding Dyslexia, several states have adopted new policies mandating universal screening for dyslexia and other reading difficulties. Just to give you a sense of scale, in the past 5 years, universal screening laws for dyslexia has nearly tripled. For example, in 2013, only a handful of states had universal screening laws, and about another 6 or so had pilot programs to establish universal screening procedures. So what do you need to know? So from an Amplify perspective, as these policy trends began to emerge a few years ago, we decided internally to establish a research and development effort to closely study this important issue. As a part of this work, we've met with parents, advocates, researchers, policymakers, and others to help build upon these efforts. And that's in the form of advocacy as well as R&D to really help states provide every child with a strong foundation for reading success. To date, some of the common themes in dyslexia laws include dyslexia awareness. Such laws include defining dyslexia. Other themes include universal screening for dyslexia risk. This typically takes it in the form of pilots or statewide requirements. These laws also include reporting requirements, so school districts having to share information with state agencies and also with parents. Often teacher training is included, as well as provisions for interventions and accommodations, and overall rights for individuals with dyslexia. This also takes form in terms of states establishing state task forces to study educational issues and needs impacting students at risk. However, for the purpose of this presentation, we will focus on the topic of new early universal screening laws for dyslexia and other reading difficulties. So where is this happening? At present, about 21 states have passed dyslexia screening laws. And you can see all of those states highlighted on this map in turquoise. It is worth noting that in over 2/3 of these states highlighted in turquoise, about 2/3 of those states have the DIBELS assessment is approved or allowed for use by districts to meet state dyslexia screening requirements. So the way that this usually takes form is that DIBELS is included on state approved lists, or sometimes they're included in state guidance as examples. Another key point that states stress in their policies is the importance of new dyslexia screening requirements not to be used to supplant or postpone IDEA or Section 504 eligibility determination process if a disability is suspected. So you may see, or you may be aware of similar trends reflected in language throughout these states. And just a couple of examples include Missouri, the state where Stacy is from, as well as Alabama, Indiana, and others. So let's take a look at where states are with the process. While 21 states have screening laws on the books for dyslexia risk, they are all in different places in terms of their implementation. For example, some states already have policy laws in place, and those are the states that are highlighted on this map in purple. And so states like Louisiana or Texas or Nevada, they've had these policies in place for some time. Other states are just getting started in terms of having those screening requirements beginning this school year. So those are the states highlighted in green, states like Missouri, for example, or Oregon. A couple of other states have passed laws, and they will begin implementing their screening requirements next school year or beyond, and those are the states highlighted in orange. And then finally, we have about half a dozen of other states that are highlighted here on this map in turquoise who are studying this issue. And so those are states that are looking at a variety of issues, including dyslexia screening, so we may see some traction as well in those states. I will now pass the baton to my colleagues at NCIL and UO to walk us through the next section. Thanks.
Hello, this is Hank. Glad to be here, and Gina Biancarosa is with me to jump in. So the National Center on Improving Literacy, or NCIL, I mentioned earlier, we are charged with providing ways of scaling up evidence-based policies and practices for students with dyslexia. One of our main target audiences are state departments, but we also are providing information to districts, to schools, to parents, to parent advocacy groups. So we have a very broad array of stakeholders. In fact, one of the some of the slides I'll be presenting are I used last week, where we convened our first dyslexia technical work group with sort of a who's who of the leading neuroscientists in the field, like Guinevere Eden, John Gabrielli, Mark Seidenberg, Nadine Gabb. And so it's been interesting working as a behavioral scientist with neuroscientists in this area of dyslexia, where we know more about this phenomenon at the neural level, at the cognitive level, at the behavioral level, at the academic level than we know about any other phenomenon. And one of the things we know mostly is that if we want to identify students early and reduce the risk associated with having dyslexia, that we need to begin that early, as soon as students show up in the schools and in kindergarten. As you know, if you want to go to the next slide, as you know, most of state level accountability systems start in 3rd grade. And so we know the science is very clear that if you start trying to screen and identify students for reading difficulties, including dyslexia in 3rd grade, that it's much too late. Most of the science that we have supports early intervention and prevention for students, both with reading difficulties and dyslexia, and that there's a critical window early on in students' formal learning in kindergarten, some would argue even in pre-kindergarten, in preschool, so that we're not waiting for them to fail, basically, that we're going to have a much more proactive approach to quickly and efficiently screen all our students to identify those students that may need additional support. We also know that the nature of the problem is rather large. Approximately 40% of students in 4th grade are reading at grade level, and many students are reading below basic levels of reading, which is, you know, you should go onto the NAEP website to take a look at the kinds of questions that student can't answer that would be below basic. I mean, it's alarming. And if you look at student subgroups, students with disabilities, English learners, students that grew up in poverty, low SES, the number of students that are passing at grade level is, at some cases, 10%, with the great majority of those reading below basic levels. So the nature of the problem is rather large, and we also know that with early intervention and prevention, we can greatly increase the number of students reading at proficiency levels and greatly reduce the number of students reading below basic levels. Okay, can you, I'm sorry, go to the next slide. Thank you. And so what we know is that identifying kids early on, this is a graph from a study that we did here at the University of Oregon and replicated in other studies, that trajectories are set pretty early on. In this graphic, it's in the beginning of 1st grade. But what you also notice is once those trajectories are set, it's very difficult to alter that trajectory without intensive and expensive intervention. What we also see is that the gap between students that are on track and that are off track widens over time. So some will call this the Matthew effect. And one other thing that we know is that summertime seems to be an especially problematic time period for students in the lower trajectory. Breaks from schools for 10, 12 weeks seems to account for most of the gap widening over time. So identifying these kids early on, providing them good, robust, multi-tiered interventions, providing them summer school and summer programming is critical for these students. And we, you know, if we wait till 3rd grade to start testing them, we won't know who the students are in the lower trajectory. And I would even argue the first days of kindergarten, the first weeks of kindergarten, that we have the tools and technologies to predict with pretty good accuracy those students that will not succeed on these accountability measures without pretty significant validated interventions. Do you want to, if we move on to the next slide, please? So on the next slide, you'll see that over the last several years, as groups from Decoding Dyslexia that have been a force in nature, and I'm sure that we have some folks on the line, I would imagine, a force that has altered state legislation like I've never seen before. And so I think that there's about 40 states now that have legislation related to attending to the science base to identify, well, actually just understand and recognize that dyslexia is an actual condition, and to use prevention science to identify them early and provide them good interventions. Sally Shaywitz, in testimony that she's given to Congress, has said that, you know, we don't have a knowledge gap in how to identify kids early on and provide them good intervention. What we have is an action gap, that if you in a majority of schools where there are no universal screenings in place in K through 3, or systematic intervention in place that are explicit, that actually teach kids the code, the alphabetic code, which is a signature hallmark of difficulty with students with dyslexia. So she made this very clear and compelling case that we have an action gap, not a knowledge gap. I would argue that there's a lot we know. I would also say there's a lot we still need to learn, especially for older kids that have protracted reading difficulties and are grade levels behind with moderate to severe forms of dyslexia, that we have a lot of research to continue to do for those students. Can you forward it to the next slide, prevention and early intervention? So what we know is reading trajectories are set early, and we know that without intensive intervention that the gap widens over time, and we know that there's a lot of components of systems level implementation that schools can put in place that are based in pretty solid evidence in terms of universal screening, in terms of monitoring progress for students, in terms of rigorous tier 1 instruction that covers the 5 big ideas of reading, in terms of using screening to identify students, to put them in small group instruction, and increasingly intensifying the interventions for those students that don't respond. So we have a lot of discrete evidence for each of those components. There's less evidence of when you put them all together in multi-tiered systems of support as a systems level, whether that actually improves student outcomes. We have some research studies actually that we've conducted here at the University of Oregon in an MTSS version called Enhanced Core Reading Instruction, where we have strong evidence that it works. A study was just done by Russell Gersten and team where there was a null effect for MTSS. However, what they found was schools weren't actually implementing MTSS. So what we learned from that is if you don't implement it, it doesn't work. And that's probably the #1 finding across intervention research is fidelity of implementation. So fidelity of implementation of MTSS is still an issue in the field. So if you want to go to the next slide, our approach to teaching students with dyslexia, because state law is primarily affecting schools, most of the resources we're developing right now are for schools and districts. So we're using, SLD as a means to incorporate dyslexia into the identification method. And so you can use the word dyslexia synonymously with word level reading disability under specific learning disabilities. And primarily, these students have issues in the core areas of phonological processing, including phonological awareness or the sound structure of language, beginning with rhyming, and the most precise is getting down to the phoneme level, being able to segment and blend phonemes. The alphabetic principle, which is mapping the orthography or letters onto sounds and being beginning to blend those sounds to read words or phonological recoding. We also know that there's a lot of ancillary complications that result from these core processing deficits and can spill over into reading comprehension, vocabulary development, fluency development. Even though they're not core deficits that define dyslexia, they are ancillary complications that are associated with dyslexia. I'm going to pause and keep on this slide for a moment, but go back one slide if you don't mind.
Yeah.
One of the things is the good news is that we know how to identify kids early. We know the technology necessary for measuring these core aspects of phonological processing. And we know that if you identify students in the early grades and provide them intensive interventions in phonemic awareness and phonics, actual decoding instruction, that we can alter the trajectory for these students in a positive way, in a very positive way. And that's exciting news and great news. And as we work together with the field and schools to scale that up, I anticipate great reductions of students reading below basic levels. However, there's some areas that we're still working on. If you look at the work of Sharon Vaughn and others, where they're identifying their students in the middle grades with reading difficulties and providing them with very well-designed, very intensive explicit interventions for an hour a day, for 2 hours a day, that it's very difficult to intervene at that point. And so the main emphasis and the main push is we really got to get schools screening kids early on, well before the state accountability test is one of the main messages, and using that information to put students in interventions that target foundational reading skills is critical.
Great, thank you so much, Hank. Up next is our colleague Danielle.
Hi, yes, thanks, Hank. And like Julia mentioned, one of the things that we want to talk about is not just what is the research and policy saying, but how can we get to a place where we can successfully implement these policies. We know it takes a lot to be able to identify students and get them the right instructional and intervention supports early. So how do we go about doing that? And step one really is figuring out what are the tools that I can use to help screen students and identify them as having difficulty and where those difficulties are happening. We know teachers need high quality tools, and we know that there are also specific legislative requirements that call for certain skills to be assessed in the screening process. So we're going to take some time to describe for you the mCLASS assessments that are available to support teachers and students. I know many of you probably are familiar with mCLASS a bit, but many of you might not be. So just want to take a minute to describe what mCLASS is. It's a suite of assessments that is designed for exactly the purposes Hank was describing, to identify students early, to help target their instruction and intervention, and then to monitor their progress to make sure we're actually catching them up to where they need to be. I'll provide more detail about the assessments in a minute, but they include the DIBELS assessment, or the dynamic indicators of basic early literacy skills, as well as some additional measures called the early literacy measures that include assessments of vocabulary, spelling, and rapid automatized naming that can all be used for universal screening. We're also very lucky to have Stacy with us today. So once she is with us, she'll explain an example of how to get this screening process up and running. Julia, if you could go back a slide. All right, so just really quickly, like we talked about, one of the major issues is that states have different requirements for what actually needs to be screened and assessed for dyslexia risk. But by and large, state legislation across the country has established the following areas as critical skills for assessing risk for dyslexia. And you'll notice that these are both direct assessments of those word level skills that Hank was just talking about, as well as some of those ancillary skills that he described. So depending on which state you're in, you may see different requirements for what skill areas need to be screened. But this is the list here. And mCLASS assessments, we'll see on the next slide, can be used to target these skill areas. So I think there's a little bit of a delay. The mCLASS assessments include both DIBELS and the early literacy measures. So let's dig a little deeper on what those assessments are and what they look like. mCLASS currently includes the DIBELS Next version of the assessment, and will include an updated version of DIBELS, DIBELS 8, which we collaborate very closely with the University of Oregon and Gina and Hank on the line now to develop and implement. So DIBELS Next and the DIBELS 8th edition are formative assessments that are validated to identify students at risk for reading difficulties, including those related to dyslexia. DIBELS Next was specifically designed to be used for screening and progress monitoring within those comprehensive school-wide models of literacy support that Hank was describing to prevent reading failure. In addition, DIBELS 8th has been validated for these purposes and will be validated also as a dyslexia screener for the 2019-2020 school year. So by assessing student performance on the basic early literacy skills, DIBELS helps distinguish children who are on track from those who are likely to struggle for a variety of reasons, including possible risk for dyslexia. The skills assessed on DIBELS Next include phonological awareness, alphabetic principle, phonics, reading fluency, reading accuracy, and reading comprehension. So very much aligned with what our research and our policy is calling for. And in addition, we have additional assessments of vocabulary, spelling, and RAN, the three boxes there on the bottom of the page that are additional critical skills that many legislative requirements are calling for. We can go to the next slide. You saw a little bit already. Those were screenshots of our mCLASS additional reading assessments. We wanted to provide some deeper information on these assessments because they are new, and many of you are likely pretty familiar with the DIBELS assessments. So as I mentioned, we have an assessment of rapid automatized naming, and we'll dig a little deeper on that in a minute, encoding or spelling, and then an assessment of vocabulary. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So rapid automatized naming. As Hank mentioned, dyslexia really, the hallmark difficulty is in phonological processing. And rapid automatized naming is considered to be a measure of the retrieval of phonological information. So what students actually have to do is just name numeric symbols, and the amount of time it takes them to name a set of 50 numeric symbols is counted. There's lots of research to show that deficits in this rapid automatized naming measure have been shown to be a robust indicator of risk for dyslexia in children. So that is one additional assessment that we have. The next is the spelling measure. This is an indication of the student's general level of spelling skills, and it includes a set of grade level words. A student hears a word and then has to spell it using the tiles. The words included are drawn from pools of words covering the phoneme grapheme correspondences that are typically taught at each grade level. And spelling is available within mCLASS starting in kindergarten at the middle of the year all the way through 3rd grade. And then lastly, we have a vocabulary measure. This provides additional information to determine what level of knowledge a student has of grade level words and whether the student has some strategies for making meaning of words encountered in text. The vocabulary measure is administered on an online platform, so teachers have a couple of options for how they administer the assessment. They can monitor very closely, or students can be administered it independently as they get older. It includes what we would call tier 2 words, if you're familiar with Isabel Beck's work. In other words, these are really high utility grade level words that are used across contexts, and it also includes some content specific words. So some more mathematical words and social studies and science type of words. There's a variety of tasks in the measure to get at different levels of knowledge of vocabulary, and you can see some of those there. There's what we call the 2-question vocabulary measure, where a word is provided and we ask 2 questions about it. So if I loan a friend money, am I letting him borrow money? And the student has to answer yes or no. We have some basic fill in the blank types of questions, and then some matching of a word to a definition. So we're getting at word knowledge from a variety of angles, and depending on the grade and time of year, a student will see different item types. All right, next slide, please. So those are our 3 new measures that were designed really to be companions for DIBELS, so that teachers can get a robust picture of a student's specific areas of strength and specific areas where they need additional instruction and intervention. And in terms of reporting, teachers will see all of the results for these measures in one place, and they have the option of turning on an additional flag that would indicate, based on the pattern of results that a student is displaying, they may be flagged as being someone to really check into and may be at risk for pretty significant difficulty. We also have reports that can be sent home to parents and guardians that explain a children's patterns of strength and need in really nice parent-friendly language, and provide some activities that parents can do at home to help improve their skills. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy to talk about how to really get all of this implemented.
Okay, can you hear me? There we go. All right, hey guys. Yeah, we got it? All right. I'm just very excited to be part of this panel today, because I feel like coming into this, I joined a case study a year ago with Amplify, and I feel like I'm going to talk about from the ground up, what really happens, what does it really look like when you go in and assessing the students, and how school systems are going to do this. But first of all, I'm going to start with just giving some background information from Missouri. Just like other states who are implementing these requirements to screen for dyslexia, Missouri started this year, 2018-19 school year, and what they are doing is they are requiring all students K through 3 to be screened for dyslexia. Now, what I find is interesting is they want us to do grades 1st through 3rd within the first 30 days of school, which I think is awesome, because we can hop on that and, and really find out which children and which students are at, they're at risk for dyslexia and reading difficulties. Now, kindergarten, we do not have to screen until January the 31st, because I feel like that gives them a few months to kind of get comfortable and so familiar with the computers and the technology part of assessing students. This law also requires public schools to provide professional development at least 2 years every year. So I'm very excited that Missouri took part in this. So can you go ahead and click next slide? With this being said, Missouri started, informing schools about 1.5 years ago. So obviously, Woodland, the school that I'm from, I got word of this, and I'm like, okay, what do we do? And what was really neat is that Amplify contacted us and said, hey, do you want to join this case study, which is going to test these measures that we're utilizing to identify these students with dyslexia risks. So when we went into this, it was just a year ago, I feel like that gave us an opportunity to use their resources and to figure out, you know, what does this look like? How long is it going to take? And who's going to do this? And then what do I do with the information? This was a huge success to our program and getting started for this 2018-19 school year. It was a team effort. You know, when I talk about the who that is going to implement these assessments, we were lucky enough to have 3 reading specialists along with 3 aides to go in and do these assessments. It was very user-friendly. We were fortunate enough to have iPads and touch screens for the computers or for the testing. Okay, next screen. And as we moved through this, we really reflected upon, you know, how this helped us prepare for this year. We felt like after we were through with the case study, that this was exactly what we needed for our school to meet the state requirements, to, you know, get in there and assess these students. It was if you noticed, Danielle had talked about the vocabulary, the spelling, and the RAN. And that was key into addition to all the other DIBELS assessments, because with the vocabulary, the RAN, and the spelling measures, we were able to meet our requirements for our state. And I was just going to talk a little bit about that and how we went through and executed those assessments quickly. You know, as a teacher standpoint, and as from a reading specialist, we want to go in and see, you know, how can we do this efficiently without spending a lot of time on paperwork, grading, you know, going through and having to figure out all of these scores for these students. So what we did is we went ahead and continued this year with the dynamic measures of the vocabulary, spelling, and RAN. And what that did is we went in, it took us maybe 40 minutes to do vocabulary and spelling, which is huge because that is fast. Grades second through third grade can do that independently. Now, when you do kindergarten and first grade, we would do that in groups of 4 to 6 kids in an individual classroom. So again, you need to think about who's going to be administering that and then how quick. The RAN was very simple. It was one-on-one testing. We used 4 to 6 reading teachers and aides, and we knocked it out in like 20 minutes, 30 minutes top for each class. Okay, so why am I talking about this? Because what's amazing is not only was it efficient, but we had instant reporting and data analysis. And this was a huge time saver for teachers to get together and collaborate on this data and actually move into the important part, which is, you know, providing those tier instruction. What are we going to do during that instructional time? The rigorous activity that we have to plan, and everything for, you know, for our school to meet these requirements. And, you know, I keep on saying meeting requirements, but actually it's not all about that. It's about identifying these students early. And I would definitely agree with everyone who mentioned above, you know, third grade's too late. We've got to start kindergarten, first grade. And I'm so excited that Missouri, you know, took part in this and can, you know, to hop on this action. And then Amplify helped us go through and get this finished and get this done. So, and I'm finished. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacy. That was really insightful, and really, we consider ourselves fortunate to have a partner on the line to share your experiences from a classroom perspective and also a literacy expert. And so thank you for that.
Yes, no problem.
As we begin to wind down our presentation, we have appended a couple of resources to this deck for those interested in learning more about how Amplify is helping children at risk for dyslexia, including a few upcoming webinars as a part of our Dyslexia Awareness Month series. So please mark your calendars for Monday, October 22nd, as well as Thursday, October 25th, where our colleagues will be digging deeper into some really important issues related to dyslexia. We also have a couple of blog posts that we have written, and we're hoping to also draft a couple more in the coming year. So please check out those when you have a chance. If you have any questions, you can also email us at mclass@amplify.com. You can give us a call. You can also follow us on Facebook, so there are many ways to find us. And if you have any very specific policy questions, I would encourage you to email me. I would love to answer any questions you may have, or receive any feedback you may have. If there are certain states that we may have missed that should be on our radar, please let us know. We really welcome that back and forth dialogue. And I know also that our colleagues, the National Center, have resources. Hank, would you like to mention that as well?
Yeah, thank you. So our center has a website, but our CTL has its own website, but we have a separate website for the National Center on Improving Literacy, and it's improvingliteracy.org. So please visit it and see the resources we have.
Great. And just so you all know in the audience, we will also make sure that we include those resources in the revised deck that you will be receiving as a follow-up. I believe that is it. Great. Oh, one last thing. We will be
questions from the audience.
Okay, great.
So if the panelists would like to answer these as they can. The first question, a user asked, Georgia also has a Senate study committee on dyslexia. They are likely to recommend screening at least, and we're likely to see legislation for that this winter. Is there anything the panelists would like to add to that?
No, this is Julia Gonzales. I would just say thank you for the heads up. I was not aware of the Senate's work on this issue. And if you have any further details, that would be great, but I will make sure that I add it to my list. One of the things I did want to mention is that both the center and ourselves will be at the International Dyslexia Association annual conference in Connecticut. And so I know there will be several updates related to state policy there. So we're hoping to learn more, but we will definitely add Georgia to our list of states to follow.
Yeah, and I'll also share that we, our national center will be at the National Association of School Psychologists Conference in Atlanta in February, and so we'll have a booth with all kind of information related to screening and interventions for students with dyslexia.
And we will also have a presence there, sharing the reliability, validity, and initial field study information that we obtained for those new measures we discussed.
Okay, great. Next question is a user from Alaska. They are saying that in their school district, they use Ames Web, not DIBELS. Can this be used with mCLASS?
I'll let Danielle take that question.
Currently, we support the use of the early literacy measures with DIBELS. But that isn't to say that we wouldn't in the future have that as an option for other users.
And I would say too, just from my experience in talking with different state agencies, some states have a firm requirement in terms of which tools can be used for screening purposes, but they also can allow other measures to be used on top of that if there is an interest. So a state like Virginia, for example, they are required to use the PALS assessment for early literacy screening as well as dyslexia screening, but they do allow LEAs to use different tools on top of that requirement. So I'm not sure if that's of interest for Alaska, but at least for the time being, this might be something that they might want to explore on top of what they're already using with Ames Web.
Okay, great. The next question is, in our school, we are told teachers cannot screen for dyslexia as the special education teacher has to screen. Who can screen for dyslexia?
I can weigh in from my perspective. I think one of the things that's been been confusing in the field and with all the state regulations and legislation is understand the difference between screening and identification. And so we recommend that teachers and other professionals can screen for dyslexia, but that when it comes to a comprehensive evaluation and actually identifying a student with dyslexia, that yes, that's a specialized skill that a school psychologist or a special education, depending on the state, would have to be able to do.
That's a great point, Hank.
Okay, great. A individual from Pennsylvania is wondering how to find out what Pennsylvania is doing about dyslexia and what can they do to get more involved to help move their state forward.
This is Julia. I would say let's definitely email each other, or like if you can email me offline. I know Pennsylvania has been studying this issue through a pilot, and I personally would also love to learn more about their findings. I'm not sure if they're public yet, but this is one state that I've been trying to find out more information on, and actually just had a conversation with one of my colleagues about what's going on in the state of Pennsylvania. I was hoping to learn more at the IDA conference next week, but I would say, and you know, in addition to us staying in touch, I would get plugged in with your state chapter of Decoding Dyslexia. They will have probably a wealth of information and track all of the policy draft bills that are being considered and that sort of thing. I don't personally know the folks there, but I know lots of Decoding Dyslexia state leads, and they're just phenomenal and wonderful resources.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in real quick to the our national center. We have 4 or 5 what we call beacon sites. These are states or districts that are at the cutting or sometimes bleeding edge of implementation in the area of serving students with dyslexia. And so we've been working very closely with PATAN, P-A-T-A-N, which is the technical assistance arm for the State Department of Education. So you should contact PATAN because they're doing trainings all over the state. Some of them we're doing with them on understanding dyslexia and how to screen for dyslexia. And then also we're actually working on a pilot in Pennsylvania on their comprehensive evaluation and identification method. That's a work in progress. That'll be, you know, a year or 2 of work together. But there's a lot of good things going on in Pennsylvania in that area. But PATAN would probably be a good place to start. And a private school group called AIM Academy is another group that is been implementing evidence-based practices, and so we're starting to work more closely with them too, as well as the chapter, Decoding Dyslexia chapter.
Great.
Okay, we have another question. Is validity and reliability information available for the mCLASS assessments that you guys discussed today?
Yes, absolutely. The DIBELS measures themselves are based on a long line of research providing evidence of their technical soundness and reliability and validity. And we also have that information available for our new measures of spelling, RAN, and vocabulary. Not as much evidence because they are new, but great sound evidence for reliability and validity. We have that documented, so we can share that information with the webinar slides.
Okay, great. North Carolina, here's another question, seems to have passed requirements, but we are not being told anything about this. How do I find out more about the law, requirements, resources, etc.?
I will start, and then Danielle, if you'd like to chime in, that would be great. I have a link to the bill I can send to you. If you just email me, that would be great. I'd be happy to send that to you. It's pretty short in terms of what it includes and to the point, but we might also have additional resources since we support the state's early literacy program. Additional guidance we can ask internally for that with respect to that question. I do know that also North Carolina has decided to allow access to these new measures that Danielle has described, vocabulary, spelling, and RAN. And so I know that educators in the state of North Carolina do have access to those measures, but we would be happy to send you more information from the department with respect to guidance. Danielle, do you have anything to add on that question?
No, I think you've covered it. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Real quick, this is Hank. Another resource for folks is if you on our website, improvingliteracy.org, under the state tab, we have a map that you can click on any state and see all the different. You can look at the whole bill, but we also just give it high-level descriptions of screening, pre-service, in-service, intervention, whether there's a statewide measurable goal for their SIMR, and then resources within that state, whether either the Decoding Dyslexia chapters or the IDEA chapters. Hopefully that'll be helpful.
Definitely.
Okay, we'll take a few more here. Another individual has asked, once screened, what interventions can you recommend putting in place?
Yeah, my recommendation is as a wearing my National Center hat, is I would explore the National Center for Intensive Intervention. That you can sort by the constructs that are important: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, and I would look at those that have been rigorously researched and evaluated for improving student outcomes in those areas.
Okay, another individual has asked, can you please talk about the difference between screening and diagnosis of students with reading difficulties, including dyslexia?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and then I'll let Danielle and others also. But the primary difference is screening for dyslexia is really about levels of risk. So when you're screening students, you're not necessarily saying this student has dyslexia. You're saying that their skill levels in these areas seem to present as the kinds of difficulties that students that go on to be identified as dyslexia present. And so the stakes associated with screening are primarily that a school would give a small group intervention. And in some states, letters have to go home to parents that say your student may be at risk for dyslexia. Identification triggers a comprehensive evaluation, a diagnosis, where a student is getting formally being either provided a specific learning disability with dyslexia nested within that, and that has that triggers IDEA and special education law, which varies somewhat state to state, but is a much more formal process. Danielle, do you guys have any other?
No, I think that's exactly it. We're really focused today on screening and like Hank has been talking about, prevention of difficulty. We know when we screen for difficulty, there's a variety of reasons that a student could be struggling. One of them is dyslexia. So we want to just provide the best quality intervention that we can to target a student's needs to try to prevent any difficulties from happening and not necessarily identify a disability at that point.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for all the questions. I hope we got to a lot of them. But I'm going to end the webinar now, and I thank you all for attending. I would like to remind everyone that we will be following up with a recording of this webinar as well. So stay tuned and be on the lookout for that.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.